I will venture a guess, go out on a limb here and say that most of the people in this room have probably never been inside a pawn shop. I know that was the case with me when I got the first recruiting call about Cash America. But what we have done really is taken a business that has traditionally been a very mom and pop, individually owned business and tried to put a corporate face on it. Because we serve the underbanked, we serve a very large segment of the population who the banks aren't interested in loaning money to, and the credit card companies are not interested in providing credit to. And that is a very large segment of the population. So when those short-term cash needs come up, then it's very common to use a pawn shop. Very simple transaction, been around for thousands of years. Piece of collateral for a loan amount you need. You have 90 days to come back and get the merchandise back. It's primarily a loan business. A lot of people don't realize that 70% of our customers actually come and reclaim their merchandise. So it's really only about 30% that forfeit the merchandise that we then sell in a retail environment. So our goal has been to put a corporate face and make people feel comfortable coming into our locations when they have a need. And just like they would go in any other retail store or any other establishment to meet that need. So that's kind of how we built our business and what we're creating on.
Okay. And kind of as a way of further introduction, since I didn't make it clear, John DePasquale from PeopleAnswers is actually the account manager and is kind of responsible for all the tactical and strategic components and bringing all the right people together. And John Kirchhoff is the behavioral analyst that was involved with the profile creation, all the validation studies and everything to make sure that the profiles in use are the sharpest possible to get you the right talent and a good fit in the organization. You guys are pretty large. Can you talk a little bit about your footprint, how many stores you have, kind of the makeup of your store organization?
Sure. We have just over 1,000 locations in 26 states and then also in Mexico. So we are distributed very similar to any retail or restaurant business in that regard, structured very similarly to any retail or restaurant business. So in those 26 states, we have some major geographic focus areas. Houston, for example, we have 65 locations in the Houston metro area, about 45 in Dallas, about 30 in Las Vegas. So kind of spread in some of the larger metro areas throughout the country. Here's just a few examples of our locations. That, like I said, our goal is to buy some smaller independent companies and put this face on them, and then also build our own locations that have grown to 1,000. So going into one of our stores is just like going into any other retail store.
And bright, nicely lit, and not kind of the scene that you would picture in your mind typically.
Yeah, it's wouldn't be appropriate to show here, but many people have the perception of the Pulp Fiction scene when they talk about pawn shops, or other movies that portray the pawn shop as a very dark and scary place. And for our customers, that's not the case at all. They are very accustomed to working with us, and we're very customer-oriented as well.
And you have different types of focus. You have the pawn shop, the financial centers, call centers as well.
And we're really moving our loan business, the payday loan business is moving more and more online. But mostly it's pawn shop locations. This is actually a picture of our Mexico location. We brought a company named Prenda Facil in Mexico, and they also have the same focus of building brighter and nicer stores down there. So they're our partner in Mexico. And then we have about 800 actually pawn shops, and we're down to about 200 other types of loan and cash checking operations. I knew when I got to Cash America, one of the biggest challenges was being understaffed. They did not have any type of technology using in the recruiting function. And one of the reasons I brought Johnny on board, obviously, was to help me with that, and he's been a very key partner and has led the PeopleAnswers project from the beginning. But they were a person short in every location. So basically, we're 1,000 people short all the time, which is really loss in productivity, unable to staff at busy times. And they wondered why they couldn't get enough applicants, but yet they weren't using the internet to advertise jobs. I mean, very old school take on business. And many people who had not worked anywhere else really had grown up in that Cash America system and didn't know other ways of doing it. So if you didn't walk into a pawn shop and fill out a paper application, I mean, that was the applicant pool. And one of the challenges in Houston, for example, there's 65 stores. One location may have 50 applications and no openings. Another store may have 2 openings and 0 applications, and they just never talked to each other and shared those applicants. So really, the profile, while being important and it became a secondary issue for us, we really needed to get technology in just to be able to drive applicants into a database so that everyone could share in the applicant pool and get to a wider audience to get our story out and get people to apply for jobs. And that's how we initially introduced technology really to the company, was through PeopleAnswers.
And if I might say something
Please.
there, I mean, PeopleAnswers was the beginning of that process. Of all the things that you see here on the screen, if PeopleAnswers doesn't go well and the implementation doesn't go well, we have no credibility and we don't continue with any of these processes. So we knew that going in, and that's why we partnered so closely with you guys from the get-go, so that we could have that credibility and go ahead and implement all the things that we wanted to do.
So talk about some of this, the fear from your candidate pool and going to an online application and that entire process.
Yeah, it was, I mean, just feeling like most of our candidates would not have a computer was a big concern for our operations leaders at the time. It was, I don't know, if our candidates don't have computers, how are they going to apply? So we had to really bring them into this century and explain how people, apply for jobs today and how they look at them. And that, what do we have to lose? If somebody doesn't physically walk in the shop and fill out an application today, you don't have any applicants at all. And I promise we'll increase this pool by 100%. And of course, we increased it by much more than that.
When you finally did get the leadership of your organization convinced, the operations leaders convinced that you needed to do this, how did you decide on the pilot plan? What was that approach? Did you start small or did you start big?
We started fairly big. One of the things, and most of you, if you're with a retail restaurant company, I've found this everywhere I've been, each region thinks that they're unique. And if you test it in one region, they'll all come up with a reason why, oh, that worked great for them because of this, but it won't work for us. So I thought it was very important to get them all on board at the same time. So what we did is we piloted in our region office cities, which for us were Houston, Dallas, Orlando, Las Vegas, is where we initially rolled this out. So everybody had a stake in seeing how it would work, and when it was working well for us, it wouldn't be one region saying, well, that can't work for me for these reasons. So that's how we initially rolled it out. And we did very high touch training in that initial pilot too. And these guys physically were in each of these locations, bringing in a whole market at a time of managers to train them on the system and get them familiar with touching it, feeling it, and understanding how it worked.
Yeah, I definitely think that doing that face-to-face training here was key to getting that rollout to work, especially that initial pilot. And once we got it rolling in each of those different cities, we started to get that pull like they talked about with Tenant this morning.
And it turned out to be a great position to be in because of that long pilot that we were in. Once everybody was convinced that it was going to work, then all the regions at once were saying, well, when can we get it here? When can we get it here? We're behind. We need to hire people. So then we had people coming to us wanting to go ahead and get the rollout going.
It is much, much more fun to have people, hey, give me this, when can I get it, what are we waiting on, than it is to try to shove it down their throat. Believe me, that was a much easier way to get it going from there.
Yeah, so to go from a pen and paper process, walk-in applicants to T1 lines in there, so they were seeing certain managers in stores, they were able to do their job much faster with a higher quality, able to focus on the real job of taking care of customers and driving revenue through the stores. And so it, again, created that pull out to the rest of the organization.
Absolutely.
Very good. So because of that extended rollout and really getting some of these things in place, it kind of affected the rest of the rollout and the way that you went in and had to handle the processes around recruitment and also training. So when we did hit that go forward point, can you talk a little bit about what you did from training perspectives with the people in the field and maybe what you did from a staffing perspective on process to make those changes?
Well, really, from a staffing process, it created one for us. I mean, everything was so different for so many different locations. And we had locations that were running ads in papers. And like Clint said, one location may get a whole lot of applicants that they weren't sharing with anyone else. So it really helped centralize the recruiting process, give everyone the same candidate pool, and it created a sense of urgency with the shop managers because they knew if they had a need and they didn't get on and find the right people, then one of their other shop managers was going to beat them to it.
Right.
So it really worked out to our advantage there. As far as training goes, once we got into rollout mode, John and Ruthie, we had them going to as many locations where they could and their schedules allowed. Where their schedules didn't allow, I went and partnered with the regional HR managers and we did the training. I had certainly sat through it enough. I could almost recite it in my sleep at a certain point. But what I saw happen in those training sessions was kind of PeopleAnswers became demystified. We had talked about it so much and built it up so much, and then when word of mouth spread of how good it was, people thought it was going to be hard to comprehend. But once we finished, they would walk in and look like a big question mark was hanging above their head. But once we delivered the data and gave them some hands-on experience, they felt very comfortable moving forward. And you know, the biggest question I got is, we're not going to break it, are we? Like, no, you can't break anything. Just get in there and use it, and if you have any problems, call me. And John and Ruthie have been readily available, and they've been great to work with.
You know, one of the things that was really important at Cash America was we couldn't just drive this down, you know, from the top down or just from the bottom up. It had to happen at both places. And so what Clint and Johnny are talking about here about that communication that they were doing at the top and getting that buy-in at the top, that was really helping. But then also, as we did the pilot and as we went to each different market and did the trainings, and as the shop managers themselves started to buy into the tool, started using the tool, started understanding that they could really improve their interviews instead of just asking, okay, where have you worked before? You know, they had some real questions to ask these folks. And instead of just hiring the first people that came in, they had a whole pool of applicants to look for as soon as they had an opening. And they hadn't had that before. And so, you know, we were able to get momentum, not just from the top down, but from the bottom up as well. And it really helped out the implementation a lot.
And from the beginning, it was important. You know, I talked to Gab, obviously personally, and he came in and he and Ira to talk to our executive team to share with them what PeopleAnswers is about and some of the companies that are successful in a distributed environment like ours. So we really were working that top piece all we could, while at the same time, you know, getting the buy-in from the end users of how this could help them. Because really it all comes down to what is this going to do for me, right? Yeah. And if you can convince them of that and show the proof in the pudding, then it becomes a much easier process.
So I think that next slide, if I'm correct here, we now can talk about the study that was completed and the impact on turnover from the application of the assessment in the process. So Clint and John, the behavioral analyst, can you guys talk about the study and the impact that it's had on your business?
Okay, so back in April of 2007, we went ahead and built the original profiles. There were two of them, one for the shop manager and then one for just the associate. And we put those together and we deployed them April 1st, 2007. So on April 1st of 2008, we hit our 1-year anniversary. And it's great that, you know, Clint had the patience, and you heard a lot about how the extended rollout, it kind of had to happen due to the technology issues, but we waited a full 2 years before we decided to conduct a higher term study. And as you guys will see in the slides coming forward, that really allowed us to look at some really neat things. And we were really able to look at the data from many, many different angles, and we got some really nice results that I know Cash America was excited to see, and hopefully everyone else will. So first off, this is just a breakdown of how many hires were made in this 2-year period. Now we're talking about the customer service reps. And as you can see, there's one group that has more than the other. So does anyone know why that might be? Any guesses? Okay, so that's the not assessed group, right? So with the rollout that we had, again, and Clint alluded to this earlier, it gave us a great experimental condition such that we had a control group where we had locations that wasn't rolled out, and then we had an experimental group where we had locations that was rolled out. So what that allowed us to do was to look at a lot of assessed versus not assessed comparisons. Now, this isn't always available for every study that we do, but again, the data that is available really dictates what we can look at. So let's move forward and talk more specifically about some of the results. So what this is showing us is these are the number of people not assessed, okay, throughout that 2-year time frame. So you can see it was a very kind of consistent trend, and it really just started to taper off recently, okay? So again, this really set up the perfect scenario to do a post-deployment study. Okay, so if we look here, we're looking at those who are not assessed versus those who are assessed, and you can see we're dealing with big numbers here. And again, that's always the best case scenario when you have an analysis you're doing and you have lots of numbers. So we had about 2,100 that were not assessed, and we had just over 1,000 that were assessed. And you can see that there was a 25.37% difference in termination between those who went through the PeopleAnswers pre-employment process versus those that don't. And Clint helped us out, and Johnny did too, I believe, in giving us some roundabout figures, some ballpark figures regarding how much these replacement costs are. So had you used the assessment, and you would use that and save approximately, again, over the 3,000 hires made across those 2 years, you would have saved around 417 hires, or a little bit over $1 million in replacement costs. And it's always fun, as a behavioral analyst, we always work with numbers, and anytime we can put something real behind those numbers, that's really when it becomes real. So what's a 25% difference mean in a turnover? Well, again, had the assessment been used and been fully rolled out from day one, that would have been the potential impact. So again, this was a great comparison, but we can look at some other comparisons as well. So now we're going to look just at those who were recommended, or those who had those thumbs up. So these are the candidates that have a good behavioral fit to the particular profile, to the role. And you can see here that this difference in termination rates has increased even further. So now we're up to about a third difference in termination rates, and obviously the economic impact of that also increases as well. Good stuff. So there's two other ways we examine this data. In this first way, we looked at turnover rate by time. So specifically, we don't care when you were hired in that 2-year time period. It could have been day 1, it could have been day 360, it could have been towards the end of the study. All we care about is what's your termination rate at 3 months out, 6 months out, 9 months out, and 12 months out. And as you can see here, between those who are recommended and not recommended, we see a very consistent and stable pattern across 4 different time periods. So if you didn't want to just look at the raw assessed versus not assessed, right, let's look at the actual differences in fit index scores from the day you're hired. And you can see that we're impacting turnover, again, across the board. And if we click the next button, we can see also the mixed thumbs are right there in between. So this is some really nice results, and this is exactly what we wanted to see. And again, could we have done this particular analysis if we had less than 2 years? Maybe we wouldn't have. And that's why you heard Dr. Taylor earlier this morning and some others talk about, again, it really just depends. We can only study what's available to us, and that's why we always try to encourage you. That's why your account manager and your behavioral analyst is always going to encourage you to try and be patient and wait so we can do this type of study for you. This isn't something we could do 2 months after we rolled out in 2007. So when Clint originally came to the office and we gave these results, I'll mention the same thing I talked about then. Every study really kind of has its own personality, and they really have a life of their own. And like any other analysis that I've ever done, I was kind of curious what the theme or what the story was going to be with this data set. And by far the most interesting results were when we just looked at what the involuntary termination rate was. So these are people that are turned over for performance reasons or disciplinary reasons. And obviously, in the industry that Cash America is in, this is a very relevant number. So you can see that those assessed compared to not assessed showed almost a 40% drop in involuntary turnover, and those recommended showed almost a 50% drop. And again, these are very, very large sample sizes here. These are very stable numbers. And I know Clint was quite pleased.
Well, one of the things hard to quantify here is, in our business, very, very cash-intensive business, a lot of cash in the store, a lot of jewelry in the store, a lot of gold in the store. So, our theft rates and internal theft are very high. I mean, especially compared to other retail or restaurant businesses I've been associated with. So, to quantify this number is almost impossible because it really did get at the root of an employee who was a better fit for us, who's less likely to steal from us and less likely to be termed for performance reasons. And so the involuntary piece was a really big piece of this. And as I have presented this to our operations leaders over the last few months since the study's been completed, this has been really the most powerful tool. And I don't know if we've got the management one on here as well.
Okay, so let's move on. And here's another little quiz. Well, actually, first off, so now we're moving from the customer service associates to the shop manager. So you should notice 2 things that jump out at you on this slide. First of all, what's the sample size look like for the shop managers compared to the last study we just saw? That's right, much, much smaller. And I know I maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but we can only study what's available to us. That what's circled in red there, that there was not a single shop manager that was hired that had a fit index score of 59 or below. So there were no not recommends. There were no thumbs down, which meant I had one hand tied behind my back when I started to go through this analysis, because that's a comparison I couldn't have. But we saw such compelling results from the first study, I decided, let's go ahead and look at this anyway, and let's see what we find. And so you're going to notice it's a little bit different how we present the results, but especially on the involuntary piece, we saw some very, very interesting things.
Well, just a quick comment on that. At the shop manager level, the HR professionals in the field are more involved in the hiring. So they were much more bought into the tool, more familiar with using it. So they were actually involved in the hiring decision. At the CSR level, shop managers completely making that hiring decision. So you see them across the board a lot more consistent. But here, with that belief in the tool, they just did not hire during the study period someone who was not recommended for the profile. So that contributed to it as well.
Yeah, and I actually like irresponsible hiring managers. I love it when people hire not recommends. It's great, because then I can act like a little kid and say, told you so. You should have done it. So, so again, but obviously at the higher level, they did a great job of hiring people they shouldn't have. But we still had a lot of not assessed due to that long rollout, so we still had some interesting things to look at, as well as the involuntary termination rates. So let's just roll through these pretty quick. And we can see here again, assessed compared to not assessed. And notice the sample size is much, much smaller. So we were dealing with thousands of people in the last study. This time around we had 102. But we still saw good results between assessed and not assessed, about a 43% difference. And again, due to the calculations that we kind of figured out, if you had used PeopleAnswers for all those 100 hires that you used across those 2 years, that would have been about $180,000 in replacement costs.
We invest quite a bit in our newly hired shop managers. We bring them to Fort Worth for a centralized training program. So there's quite a bit of investment in the first 90 days of their employment. So that's actually a conservative number based on what we invest in our management hires.
Okay, so now we're looking at specifically those recommended versus those not recommended, and as expected, the difference in termination actually widens even more. So we have a 53% decrease in termination, and again, the conservative estimate we saw was around $220,000 in replacement costs. So we're clearly seeing some good things that are happening here. And this really is what really made the study what it was, and this is really the story that we can all come away with. And when all of you leave, and I know some of us are going to dinner, maybe other of us aren't, if you can remember one thing from this presentation, about the statistical side of what we're talking about, I'd really think about this. So look at the drop in involuntary termination between those assessed versus not assessed. Okay, we're close to 90%. And I'll be darned, but out of those 30 hires they made that had those thumbs up, not a single one has turned over for involuntary reasons. And I believe, Clint, again, this study was finished up 4 or 5 months ago.
No, I checked last week. They're still all employed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So still today, they're all there. So, and again, it's really just, they were very patient, and they allowed us to, when you wait long enough and you have enough hires and enough terms, we can really do some interesting things. So it was just a pleasure to work with this data set. It was a lot of fun.
For those of us with liberal arts degrees, can you talk about the numbers at the bottom?
That's a little awkward. So if anyone has any questions regarding the funny drawings and numbers at the bottom, that's just, that's a chi-square statistic, and it's talking about the differences between frequency counts, so percentages. And that p-value just means it's statistically significant, so it's not due to chance. What we're seeing here is stable, it's solid, it's really there. And again, I know those fancy figures that only those with liberal arts degrees that you can read on the bottom. They were there for a lot of other slides, but it's pretty much the same story across the board.
I will say, though, when I present this to our finance team and our leadership team like I have, I make up something each time, and they believe it every time. So just stay statistically significant, and then make up the rest, and they buy it.
So kind of to piggyback on that, when you were presented the results internally, you also presented to the field. So what was the feedback from the field, and how did they further buy into this?
Feedback has been extremely positive. So much of the positive reception of the tool was automating it to start with. having a candidate flow to start with, being able to get staff without having to leave the shop. So all those things were very positive already. But when I was able to present these results at our recent market manager meeting, we had them all in town, it was really powerful. In fact, a lot of them came up to me afterwards and talked more about statistical significance. But no, they believe in it. I mean, they truly have seen a difference in their team members' commitment levels. Even, I mentioned coming in and filling out a paper application. A lot of what we were getting were people who just needed to fill out applications in order to meet their unemployment requirements. Well, to have to go through the PeopleAnswers, piece, even though it's a pretty simple piece, people who aren't really interested in the job will self-select out and not complete that process. Mm-hmm. So even that on the assessed, not assessed helps you get to a better candidate pool and not waste any time on talking to people who you're not going to hire. So they love the tool, they love the results, and in fact, we even had one of our region vice presidents who was one of the most vocal detractors at first, who just said, our people don't have computers, this will never work. We've tried other tools that told us who to hire, not to hire, and he actually stood up and said, it was one of the biggest detractors. I'll tell you that I'm now one of the biggest supporters, and let me tell you, if you're not using the tool, you're missing out, and if you're not paying attention to what the profile is and using the interview questions and completing the process, then you're really missing out. And by him saying that, much more powerful than me saying it, because he's been with the company for 20 years, and is a respected operations leader among his group. So if he believes in it, then they're more willing to use it, and I appreciate him stepping up and saying that.
And it's been incredible. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's been incredible for me to see PeopleAnswers become such a part of our culture. When 3 years ago, I was trying to introduce this tool, and they were saying, we don't need this, we don't want this. And now we're very dependent on it for our hiring, and it is part of our culture.